Today we hear about the power, the necessity, the importance of prayer in our lives. And I use this as a jumping off point to talk about my own particular vision about church and parish life. So I start off with a few questions. Have you experienced the sadness of divorce? Your own, your parents, or maybe one of your children? Who has not been touched in some way by divorce within their family? Have you experienced doing all the right things with your kids, bringing them to church every week, maybe sending them to the Catholic school or at least CCD for sure, and then they go off to college and they don't practice their faith anymore? Or maybe you've got one of those kids that gets married but not in the Catholic Church. Or maybe you've taught your kids to obey the commandments. You've raised them both the same way, and one of them turns out to be pretty alive spiritually, and the other one turns out to be kind of a mess, replete with poor decisions and consequences that they live through, and you have to help them. These kinds of examples, in one way or another, I think touch every one of us in some way, in some fashion. Family life today is more vulnerable to the devil's attacks than ever before, it seems to me. Here in Hartington, here in this rural area of Nebraska, we have social media and the internet that brings all the temptations that the big city has right into the lap of our children. No one is immune from the tactics of the devil. It's become a custom in our society, as I read things and as I look at kind of like the major writers of the world or the newspapers that exist and the way the media presents things, it's become a custom to place faith in a cellar. Cold, dark, and out of sight. Cold and dark and out of sight. Faith in our culture today is attributed as some sort of a bygone thing from an unenlightened generation. Only crazy people practice their faith, even to the point of making Christianity almost a kind of terrorism that denies freedom. When we believe in such things as the right to life of the unborn, we are accused of people who deny freedom to the woman who wants to make a choice. When we believe in things like the sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman, we become bigots against those who are of the gay community. When we believe in conscience protection for doctors and nurses to be able to administer the kinds of things that they can morally do and not do those things that they consider immoral, we consider it, that the society around us considers that denying the common good for those people who want to do those things. Or maybe we consider it immoral for us to give our tax money to things that really does not promote our way of life. And we are accused of being against the common good, a society of freedom. The talks this week that you've heard, or perhaps have heard, from the Republican convention will be repeated in lots of different ways at the Democratic convention. Obama and Hillary and Trump, I don't think, have it at all correct. The issue is not so much these problems in society that they are looking at. The issue is what underlies it all. The demise of the family. The demise of the family. So many statistics today tell us of the struggles that people have today with maintaining permanent commitments to their children and to their families. When it comes to practicing our Catholic faith today in our society, we find ourselves on the losing end of the percentages. 56% of those people who consider themselves Catholic actually are registered in a parish. 33% of those people who consider themselves Catholic actually attend Mass at any given time. 24% of those who consider themselves Catholic attend Mass weekly. And Another way of looking at the statistics using some of the numbers. 68.1 million people in the United States are connected to some parish by reason, at least, of their attachment by registration. 68 million. But there are 81 million in the United States that consider themselves Catholic. And the second biggest church in the United States are those Catholics who have fallen away from the church. 25 million. They outrank the Southern Baptists. Another way of looking at some of these statistics is this. The number of parishes that existed in the United States in 1965, 50 years ago, and 2015, in other words, a 50-year spread, is virtually the same. A little over 17,000 parishes in the United States. In 1965, of those 17,000 parishes, 549 did not have a resident pastor. In 2015, 3,533 did not have a resident pastor. Another one that's kind of interesting is this one. Active diocesan priests per parish. Active diocesan priests per parish. In 1965, it was 2. In 2015, 1. What's happened in 50 years? We can put those statistics along the issues that struggling families are dealing with the divorce rate and all the different kinds of addictions that are harming marriages today. We add all that together, and what do we see? Basically, if there's going to be a seedbed for vocations, it's going to be the family. And so as family becomes more fragmented and more secularized, it's less able to support a kid who wants to be a priest or religious. Issues that weigh on families today boil down, according to my estimation, to one thing that we're all susceptible to: an oppressive over-activism. An oppressive over-activism. No time for us just to be. We gotta always be doing something. You know how kids are immediately when they don't have something to do? I'm bored. Well then, do something if you're bored. Be creative. Don't expect the world always to give you all of those activities. Come up with them yourself. Figure out how to play without having a toy. This over sense of activism has gotten us to be so dependent upon this activism that it seems like if we're not involved in everything, then somehow we're doing a disservice to our kids. How difficult it is for a family with teenagers to have a meal together. How difficult it is for a family to spend time together on a Sunday. Just themselves. Not have to go somewhere to something other event, but just themselves. Just to do stuff at home together. Seems like parents are spending so many hours in their car driving kids around. You wonder how it is they can make that emotional connection with their kids that is a little more extensive than just say, how you doing? So how do you carve out time that really nurtures family? And so I go back to the gospel now. My gospel, Jesus says, pray. He gives us a very simple prayer to you, the Our Father. But it's a complex prayer because there are many parts to it. But he says in that prayer, and he says in the parable afterwards, that it's important for us to be persistent in our prayer. In other words, a one-time action in a family is not good enough when it comes to spreading the faith, and even more so today. And so that's why just bringing your kids to church is not enough anymore. Because they don't have all the other supports. And even to the point that I would say this, bringing your kids to church and sending them to a Catholic school is not enough in the society in which we live today. If the church is really doing its job, what it needs to do most is to help moms and dads figure out how to be a little church at home. To have moms and dads have that dialogue with their kids about faith issues. And what's that dependent on? That's dependent on mom and dad truly having a fired up faith inside so that they can share that faith with their children. It's my highest and my personally learned priority for myself. And it's also my priority for me, myself as pastor, to lead families back to being the prime place where faith is consciously and thoughtfully lived. Consciously and thoughtfully. You can't take it for granted. To apply the same kind of skills that you use as a farmer when it comes to choosing the kind of hybrid you want to put out there on this particular field. When it comes to the job that you have in a company that never does any in-services with you, it immediately starts to fall behind. To have a computer at home without ever having it updated is for you to eventually not have any help for it. In society and things like that, we're always getting better. We're always improving. We're always looking for a way to stay ahead. The same is true when it comes to our faith. We got to figure out what that is and how to work it. But where does it begin? It begins with couples, moms and dads, or husband and wife to begin with. It begins there. How is it that we as a church can help couples learn how to pray together? To learn how to pray together. Because if that husband and wife, in their process of getting married, can pray together, number one, they're going to help each other stay chaste before marriage. But number two, they're also going to become very, you know what, if you want to take out a life insurance policy on your marriage, prayer together is the only one that really works. Statistically, it's actually borne out very clearly. It's not just going to church. It's that praying together at home, truly sharing the faith. And so how do you do that? Well, you first of all got to turn off the media. Turn off that stupid cell phone for a little while. Or put it in the other room so you can't hear it vibrate. Light that unity candle and say a prayer together. Share those prayers, those moments where you were able to kind of put together your hopes and your fears and your desires for each other and your problems and your joys, and pray out loud. Say what's in your heart and let the other one hear you. You know, St. John Vianney, back in the years in which he lived, was right after the French Revolution. And the little town he was assigned to was called Ars in France, Ars. And that little town was susceptible to all of the influence of the French Revolution. Now, the French Revolution was not just a matter of freedom. It also threw off the shackles that they considered to be church. Anything related to faith. That was passé. Don't believe in God anymore. Not necessary. Be secular. And so, that little town had lost its faith and lost its direction. It took him an entire lifetime for him to convert that town. Here's one of the little pieces of advice he gave in one of his homilies. He asked families to do this. I want you to spend 3 minutes praising and thanking God for all that you have. And then I want you to spend 3 minutes asking pardon for your sins, how you hurt one another, and present your needs to God. And then I want you to spend 3 minutes reading the Bible or listening to God in silence. 9 minutes. That was his advice. He's a saint. Good advice. And he wants people to do that every day. Parishes spend huge resources in teaching kids. Parishes spend huge resources in teaching kids. Jesus, interestingly enough, spent most of his time teaching adults and blessing kids. Because he knew that if I got the adults, I got the kids. Well, I believe we've got the kids, and I'm going to use them as the carrot to get the adults. Because that's the important part. To increase the faith and the dynamic discipleship of adults who are raising children. In other words, the words that go with this is called family formation. To let the church do what it does best by helping families be families. And so one of the goals that I've got this coming year is to gather a group of adults in our parish who will sit with me, vision with me, do some reading, do some praying, pray for families, take a look at everything we're doing here, and figure out how is it that we can do something a little differently so that we can help families be that dynamic force to pass on the faith to that next generation. So that's my direction, and that's my desire for you, to make disciples of the Lord who are truly formed to be practicing their faith. There's a lot of good things that support this, like CEC, or That Is You, or whatever programs involved. Perpetual adoration is even another support within this whole process. And we all aim all of these things at that one goal, praying for it and asking the Lord to renew our parish, renew our families. I think if we take care of that, everything else will take care of itself. It's not that we won't do anything else. It's that those things end up becoming kind of like the good fruit that comes from doing what most important first. None of this will really happen unless we begin to think outside the box. And so it's going on to some new turf, and it'll be shaking things up a little bit. And the way we did things may not be the best way to always do things. But I feel confident that the potential is here and that the Holy Spirit is ready to use us to create a new thing in our midst. I end with a little story about Bunnaberry Foster, fictitious Irish character. Lived in Dublin. Went over to see an individual, a person in his parish, and he parked his car on a steep hillside. On the back seat of his car was his faithful pooch, sleeping. And so he parked the car, and he got out, and as he's closing the door, ready to lock it, he says to his pooch, "Stay." And the pooch is still laying there, just kind of looks up at him and just keeps on sleeping. And just as he locks the door, he says again, "Stay." He locks the door and he walks away from the car. An elderly gentleman looked at this scene and said, "Wouldn't it be better just to put on the parking brake?" Well, when it comes to the unbeliever looking at us praying for something like what I just talked about, to them, it looks like that priest talking to his car and telling it, "Stay." For the believer, we know that prayer is very powerful and very important. Without it, we lose the gas that powers the engine of our lives. For the believer, it is so much more. It is the most powerful force, allowing us to connect with God. And prayer is also the source of all the graces that are needed to power marriages,